Well, hello. Welcome to the Nothing is Wasted podcast. I'm so grateful that you are joining us for yet again another great episode where we are meeting you in your pain and providing a pathway through. There is a pathway through your pain. Maybe you've jumped on to this podcast because of someone's referral. Someone mentioned to you, hey, you should listen to this podcast. Maybe it's because you're going through something difficult. Maybe it's because you're trying to help other people through things that are really difficult. The common denominator of life for us is pain. It's what levels the playing field. It's what neutralizes the human experience. All of us at some point are going to go through a valley, multiple valleys, trials, hardships, trauma, tragedy. Jesus said in this world, we will have sorrow. But he gave us a declaration of hope, and that is that we can take heart, for he has overcome the world. And so we are going to, here on this podcast at Nothing is Wasted Ministries, we're going to meet you in your pain. We're going to provide you a pathway through that pain, through your valley, so that you can turn around and help other people through that. So grateful that you're joining with us here today. I have the incredible honor of introducing you to a new friend of mine, Greta Eskridge. And let me tell you an interesting story. So Greta and I met in a very unconventional fashion. Although I shouldn't be surprised, because this is kind of how God does things. He works through relationships in what we call the divine flow, where when he does something, you kind of go, wow, that seems way too coincidental to be coincidental, because coincidence, there's no such thing. Everything is by God's hand. Everything is providential. So anyways, I was going on a major television show. I can't remember what it was. I can't remember if it was up in Toronto and it was 100 Huntley Street, or if it was the 700 Club, or I cannot remember right now as I'm recording this. I could go look it up if I wanted to, but it doesn't matter. But I'm getting picked up at the hotel by someone from the studio, and they were going to take us to go, do, which it always is a little bit weird for me, but to go do hair and makeup. And I'm like, I'm putting makeup on. The only thing they cover up is my freckles, And so, anyways, there in the lobby was another woman who they were filming as well. So they always do like batch recordings, and they kind of do these dual filmings. They bring a couple people in at a time. And we're kind of in the car and we're talking just cordially with each other as this lady's driving us to the studio. And I start to ask her about herself, and she starts to ask me about myself. We kind of get into our stories, all that kind of thing. And then I find out that this lady, she is a major voice in homeschooling. And so our podcast producer loves, like geeks out over homeschooling. She's homeschooled her kids all the way through. She has like curriculum that she has built and she's curated. I mean, she's incredible at this. In fact, Christy and I just stepped in this year to homeschooling our kids as well, for various reasons I don't need to get into, but it just felt like the right flow for our family. And so our podcast producer and content producer, Catherine, she's been very helpful at this. And so I just happened to, while I was sitting there with Greta, finding out that she was really into homeschooling, I started asking her, hey, do you know about this person? Do you know about this person? She's like, oh yeah, that person's a friend of mine. And I'm like, oh wow. So I text our podcast producer, Catherine, I'm like, hey, I'm sitting with this lady here who seems to know a whole lot about homeschooling. Have you ever heard of her? Her name's Greta Eskridge. And Catherine, like, exclamation point emojis back to me. She's like, I love Greta. I've heard her speak at different conferences or whatever. And I like just love her stuff. And I'm like, well, I'm sitting in a green room with her right now. She's like, are you serious? So I tell her about why she's getting interviewed. It's for her new book, which I'll tell you about in a second. And she's like, that is so amazing. So as I'm drawing Greta out about homeschooling, we're talking about this stuff, I hear her story and I go, you got to come on our podcast, because your story is so remarkable. Not just what you've had to walk through, but also how you guys have healed through this and how you're helping other people through this and how you're helping other people in a space with a voice that is unique and that we need today, especially as parents who are trying to help kids navigate this digital age, trying to help kids navigate this age of screens. And so I'm going to tell you this, it's a little bit of a shock and awe, but the name of Greta's book is It's Time to Talk to Your Kids About Porn. That's right. That's the name of it. As soon as Greta told me that, she said, well, I'm here to talk about a book called It's Time to Talk to Your Kids About Porn. And I was like, oh, like something about that was so shocking. And yet it was also like, it resonated with me. I was like, yes, we need to be having this conversation. The church needs to be having this conversation because our kids right now are trying to navigate a world that, if you're my age, I'm about to turn 40, depending on when you listen to this. I may have already turned 40. We weren't having to navigate. We didn't have to navigate this digital age. I've been reading books by like Michael Haidt, The Anxious Generation, and just what a detriment it does to our kids to be locked to screens and smartphones and have access to literally everything they could possibly have access to unfettered. And just how much it's causing society even to devolve, and what is our responsibilities in digital discipleship as parents. So Greta just has an unbelievable story about she and her husband walking through infidelity, walking through betrayal, which many of you guys have experienced. I know, unfortunately, it's absolutely so heartbreaking. In fact, some of the most listened to episodes of the Nothing is Wasted podcast are on betrayal. You know, I'll say this. If that's your story and you've experienced that, I'd love to connect you with all of our resources, all the podcast episodes, all the master classes we've ever done, any mini courses, anything related to sexual betrayal, addiction, infidelity. If you go to nothingiswasted.com/pathways, nothingiswasted.com/pathways, and you just fill out that form and choose sexual betrayal as the pathway that you would like, it will send you all the resources that we have on sexual betrayal. This is a new feature that we are really trying to highlight because we've taken the time to curate everything we've done at Nothing is Wasted Ministries around certain pain points or topics, because we know that you're really busy and you don't have the time to wade through all of our content. I mean, we've had over 400 episodes now, but we've had a few dozen on the topic of sexual betrayal, and it'll really help you, and it'll really encourage you to hear other people who have navigated this particular pain point. Greta is one of those. And so she talks about this, her story with her husband, but then also how this began to spur on conversations with her kids to try to get ahead of it. And some of us are parents, and we're trying to figure out how to have these kinds of conversations, how to navigate this stuff with our kids, and how to do it in a way that's healthy, in a way that's godly, in a way that's not framed up as taboo or it's sometimes in the church you can kind of feel like the message becomes sex is dirty, nasty, disgusting, and gross. Save it for the one you love. It's like that feels like a conflicting message right there. So how do we talk to our kids about this in a way that's not shame-filled, but it's also it's really informative, it's educational, and it's also supporting God's design and God's ways for our sexuality. And so, I mean, Greta is just chock full of wisdom about this from her own story, from her own experience, and also from her own expertise. And so I cannot wait for you to listen to this conversation. I mean, if you're a betrayed spouse, your pain is real. It deserves validation. And Greta's going to help us as we're trying to navigate the options and the hope and the holding on to hope and what it looks like to walk through this. If you're the confessing spouse and you're kind of in a place where you have just confessed, you're trying to figure out if you're going to confess, you want to bringing things into the light that have been in the dark festering is always the first step to healing. That's why Scripture says, confess your sins to one another so that you'll be healed, right? We confess our sins to God so that we're forgiven. We confess our sins to one another so that we're healed. It's what the book of James tells us. So if you're a parent and you're looking for ways to help your teenager, your preteen, your kids navigate this, and maybe you're feeling behind, this is going to be a really good conversation for you. Or if you're a parent of young kids and you're going, how do I get ahead of this? How do I begin to build a plan for this? Because I'm telling you, the world of technology is not changing. It's not going away. And there's just going to be more and more access to it. So how do we help to guard our kids and help them to still be kids, to still be children, to live out their childhood in safety and security and in the fear and the admonition of the Lord? So Greta's got some great wisdom for us in this. Before we dive into the conversation, a couple of things. One, if you've not joined me for the Zoom call I do every month, 5 steps to taking back your story, no matter what you've gone through. I don't need to go ad nauseum into all the details about that, but if you're looking to take a first step or a next step in your healing journey, that is the step for you. You can register for the next one in one of two ways. One, go to nothingiswasted.com/start here. We'll put a link in the show notes for you. Or you can go to nothingiswasted.com and just click the big button at the top that says start here. But we believe that there are 5 steps to taking back your story, no matter what you've gone through. And we want to help you do that. And so if you would join me on that, it's always a very sacred time to spend time with you. It's a Zoom call. It's not a webinar. So cameras on, mics on, we get to have conversation, a lot of Q&A. It's a really, really special and sacred time. So I'd love to have you join me on that next one. Well, Greta, it is so great to have you on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. It is great to be able to talk to you.
What a fun thing that in a chance meeting, right? Which I don't believe anything is coincidence or chance, of course, a providential meeting in the back of a green room on a actually first in a car, getting picked up from an airport or getting picked up from a hotel. And and then it's just so cool to see how God has woven our paths together, and even how you're helping me to navigate some things with our family. I'm just so delighted that we're going to have this conversation today.
Yeah, me too. I was blown away when you shared your story, because I was like, how have I not read your book? How have I not heard of you? And that we were in Canada, like you said, going to our separate interviews, but in the car together, being picked up. And then we got to meet and share our stories. And it was just like, wow, this was planned.
What a cool thing. Those of you guys if you've been around Nothing is Wasted for a while, you may be familiar with Catherine Fitzgerald, who Catherine writes basically all of our content. She's our podcast producer. So I'm sitting in the green room with Greta, and knowing that she is does some stuff in homeschool, right? We're talking about homeschool in this green room. The decisions we're trying to wrestle through as a family. And you're starting to talk about homeschool as if you've been in the space for a long time. And so I'm like, Catherine, she knows a lot of stuff about homeschool. I wonder if she knows who Greta is. I text her and she's like, oh my gosh, I love Greta. I've seen her at Wild and Free conferences and all these different things so she is a raving fan of yours. So we're like, we have to talk about what Greta is doing, and your story on this podcast just seems so divine and providential. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Greta? Tell us what you do. Tell us, kind of catch us up to speed for those of us who aren't familiar with you. And then we'll dive into a little bit of your story and some of the message you're carrying.
Okay. So I live in Southern California with my husband. We actually celebrate our 27th anniversary tomorrow. And we have 4 kids. They range in age from 21 down to 14. Our youngest just turned 14 2 days ago, so I had to keep track of what ages they are. Our oldest just got engaged, so we're entering a new stage in parenting. And we've homeschooled our kids from the very beginning. I was homeschooled myself, always planned on homeschooling. I had a stint as a public high school teacher for 5 years before we started having kids and homeschooling. And in addition to that, I am an author and a speaker and a podcaster. So, it's a full, beautiful life.
It's a full life. Greta has just, several months ago, released a book called It's Time to Talk to Your Kids About Porn. I remember when I asked you, hey, what are you, doing here for this interview? And you just dropped that one on me. I was like, oh, well, that's a really important topic. What an icebreaker right there.
Yes.
But it's a parent's guide to helping children and teens develop sexual integrity. And after I got over a little bit of the shock and awe factor of the title, I was like, wait a minute, this is so needed, so pertinent to today's society. I'm not surprised that you're getting barraged with messages of parents who are asking for advice on this, especially the dawning of putting a device in everyone's hands where there's so much accessibility, and then trying to navigate that with some of the new generations. I mean, we're asking those questions all the time. When do we give our kids phones? What does that look like? How do we regulate? What is this? There's a lot of questions there, but you kind of stumbled upon this in a lot of ways through your own story and what's happened in your family's life. Will you just go back and give us a little bit of what's taken place in your life that really led to the inspiration of this?
Yes. I would say I never would have imagined that I'd, write a book about pornography and that I would be able to talk to a stranger about, the book title, It's Time to Talk to Your Kids About Porn. So comfortably.
Yeah.
I never would have pictured that. I grew up in a Christian home in the 80s, and it was not a time where parents were talking to their kids. Christian parents were typically talking to their kids about sex. Like my parents, they gave us the bare minimum, and that was kind of the whole conversation. Right. And we certainly weren't talking about pornography. And I was fortunate not to be exposed to pornography as a kid or even as a teen or young adult. It was not until I was well into marriage and motherhood that pornography impacted me personally. And that happened because my husband came to me and confessed that he had a pornography addiction and that he had had an affair. And what I learned immediately in that moment and in the days following that is very common for a person who is using pornography regularly to act out in other ways beyond what they're doing on the screen. And so pursuing an affair or meeting up with someone in some other way is a really common part of a pornography addiction. But in that moment, of course, I felt like our world had absolutely fallen apart. And I couldn't imagine God giving purpose to our pain. But that was my prayer from almost the start, because Aaron came to me to confess, but also to repent, to ask forgiveness, and to begin to seek healing and restoration for himself and for our marriage. And so I had hope to cling to, even though my heart was broken and it was pain I had never experienced or could even have imagined. There was hope that God would do something good with our story. And that has been the case. It's been over 15 years. And in that time, part of our healing process has been to ask God to use our story to help others. And ultimately, that has finally come about in the form of our book. And, I wrote the book, but Aaron has been an incredible voice in the whole process, helping me and helping other families, men and women who are dealing with this issue in their life, begin to find healing and ultimately to remember porn doesn't have to be the end of the story. There is hope on the other side because God is big enough to handle even something as devastating as what happened to us and to bring truly beauty and good things out of something so hard.
Wow. Greta, we've been podcasting for a long time. We have 380 some episodes. Of the top 10 most listened to episodes, I think it's Wasted Podcast, at least 5 of them are related to sexual betrayal. We have coaching. We've got about 36 coaches that coach people on different pain points. And probably the busiest of our coaches, truthfully, are ones who specialize in sexual betrayal. This is a very prevalent topic, not just with husbands betraying wives, but vice versa, right? This is something where we're just starting to kind of till up the soil and expose this in the church. It's something we're beginning to talk about. For those who are listening to this, Greta, and they've found themselves in that kind of, maybe a spouse has just come and confessed, or they've been found out or something. What did you guys find was kind of the first few steps forward in healing? Because there's a lot of wrestling and decisions going on. There's a lot of like, wait a minute, does this mean separation? Does this mean divorce? Does this mean, there's all kinds of, when your life falls out like that, it's very difficult to wade through and navigate through that. What would you say were the first few steps for you guys?
Well, I know for me, one of the most powerful moments was when I called our pastor, and Aaron had already called him and shared what was happening and confessed to him. But when I called him and he said, I know you're hurting right now, like that was his first response to me. So the validation of this is tremendous pain that you're experiencing. And then he said something else as we talked. he said, you have biblical grounds for divorce. And I, at that moment, even though I was in so much pain, I wasn't thinking like, I want a divorce, but it validated again that pain that I was experiencing, because sexual betrayal, betrayal in your marriage is so incredibly painful and traumatic. For him to say, like, God understands what you're walking through. He understands the depth of your pain and has created like a plan for this moment. And that, again, it validated the agony that I felt. But then he didn't end there. He said, but I have heard your husband's heart, and I know who you are, and I know you both have faith in the Lord, and I believe we can work through this. And so he validated my pain and what had happened, but he also didn't leave me there. He was like, I want to give you hope, and I want to walk with you through it.
Wow.
And so I think those are really important things. We need to not minimize this kind of situation and say, well, you know, it could be worse. At least he came back. At least he confessed.
Right.
To just start with, I'm sorry you're hurting. Yeah. This is devastating. And then to say, but I have hope for you and I will walk with you. So community is super important. We did not tell a lot of people. We kept our circle small. But there were people who knew what had happened, and they were friends, believers who were willing to come alongside both of us and walk with both of us. And that was incredibly important and helpful. Yeah. So, acknowledging the pain, acknowledging there is still hope, and then having people who are willing to sit with you and walk with you. Those are incredibly important things, because the temptation is to keep it absolutely hidden.
Right, right.
And Satan thrives in that, because he wants you to feel you're alone. You're the only one. Everyone will judge you. Everyone will hate you. There is no hope. And in that loneliness and darkness, it is harder to hold on to the truth or to even see the truth, because Satan's voice becomes louder in that shame and in that hiding. Right. And so getting it out, and not to everyone. You don't have to step onto, you know, the internet and tell everyone your story, but getting it out to just a few trusted people who will love you through it. That is so valuable.
I have to imagine you had to wrestle quite a bit with just this idea of not harboring resentment, releasing that, forgiveness. You know, in my own story, I'm usually one of the main topics I'm speaking on is forgiveness. And inevitably I'll have afterwards people come and ask me about, hey, in this situation or this, and often it has to do with betrayal of a spouse. How do I navigate forgiveness? How do I navigate feelings of resentment that I'm experiencing, even when my spouse is demonstrating contrition and repentance? Can you talk about that in your own experience, your own heart?
Oh yeah. I had never been so angry in my life. That was really a surprising part of it, because, you know, it was like I made the decision to forgive. I remember distinctly the moment God like telling me, you have to forgive him. And at first I was like, no, I don't want to, you know, really, you're asking me to do that. But he said, yeah, you have to. And I did. But that didn't mean that it was done, right? Like forgiveness for me was just a continual act of letting go of my anger, letting go of my fear, letting go of resentment, bitterness, anxiety. Yeah. And what that looked like for me was when those thoughts would come, whether it was a thought of anger or a thought of anxiety, whatever it was an intrusive thought that was not of God. And I would just remember the verse that says we need to take every thought captive and give it to Christ. And so I would be like, God, I can't carry this. It's too heavy. It's too much.
Mm.
I want to be so mad right now. I want to be so scared, but I give it to you. And at first it felt like that was happening like every hour.
Oh, wow.
And then I would be able to go several hours without those intrusive thoughts just flooding my head, flooding my whole body. You know, like there are times where it feels like there is a physical response to the pain, to then a whole day. And I remember like going a whole day without having those thoughts. And it felt like so powerful. I was like, wow, God, you are in this with me and you will give me freedom. But it took work. It was exhausting sometimes. And then a whole week. And then like, and I remember every step of that journey to then being able to be like, wow, I could go a whole month and I'm not dwelling on this. I'm not thinking about this. It's not this overwhelming part of my life. And that comes from God. But it doesn't mean, or it hasn't meant for me that it's ever entirely gone, because there's like pain stays. The wound turns into a scar, and sometimes that scar is irritated, and something will happen, and there will be something that triggers a memory or a feeling, and then I have to again take that thought captive and give it to God. And sometimes now, 15 years later, I'm frustrated. I'm like, really? Like, I still have to deal with this? But yeah, the consequences of sin, the consequences of the pain that happened are still there. They're far less frequent, but it does come up. And I have learned to not be like harsh with myself and be like, oh, I'm a terrible person because this still hurts sometimes. I can just say, God, you understand, and I'm going to give this to you, and you will carry it with me or for me. To be able to tell Aaron that, like, hey, this is what I'm thinking right now, and I'm really bothered, or I'm really upset. Here's why. And for him to know how to carry that with me as well. That's taken years for us to get to that point, but there's a freedom in that too.
Right.
And a beauty. And our love is, big enough to handle that as well. But forgiveness has been a long process, and I think that that's okay.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. And that's, you know, forgiveness is always a process. It has to feel so validating to be able to now, 15 years later, be able to share that space with Aaron and say, hey, I'm bothered by this right now. And even though it has something to do with what he did, him not, you know, carrying shame or condemnation in that, but actually being able to carve and create space to validate how you're feeling. And, you know, I mean, that's beautiful right there. That's a beauty coming from ashes that I'm sure is just such a sacred space for you guys to be able to hold in the midst of everything that you've gone through and the healing that you've processed.
Yes. And that has been, I think that has actually been the hardest fought part of our story, because we both have.
So. Yeah, I mean, that's for those of you guys who are in that space right now. And Greta, you know, they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, this is the hardest thing. Is like, I want to be able to share this with my spouse, but they're being defensive, or it's like their shame response or something like that is probably going to be one of the most difficult battles that you're going to face.
Yeah. Yes, because the pain, the healing rather that we've done individually has been easier to navigate. But then the healing that we needed to do as a couple to be able to say, we're going to have a conversation about like this hard moment where I was triggered by something you said or did, or something that happened that's completely out of your control. And for him to be able to feel like, I'm not judging him, I'm just saying this is what happened. And for him not to respond out of shame, for us to be able to talk about it, and for him to say, I'm so sorry you're feeling this. I love you. How can I love you better through it? And for me to say, I still love you. I'm not angry. This is just what I feel right now. For us to be able to talk about like writing this book and sharing our story with, you know, thousands of strangers. Like all of that has been hard work, but man, it has been so worth it. The pain of that work and the tears and being willing to like walk through really challenging discussions and like bring up moments that would be just really easier not to talk about again.
Right.
That has been hard work, but it has been so worth it because again, we're taking that shame and the willingness to hide. And we're saying we're not going to do that. We're going to bring it all out in the open. And we're going to let the light into a dark place because that is what God wants us to do. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. We're saying, God, we're bringing your light into these dark places that are still here. There's still healing to be done. There's still work to be done for ourselves and then for us to be able to share with others so that they can say, okay, we can let the light into those dark places too.
Yeah. We've often used the metaphor of what you referenced earlier, the open wound turning to a scar. And we've kind of used it through the lens of like, hey, at some point, this is going to scar over. If you let the Lord, the breath of the Holy Spirit, just do its thing over top of this wound, it's going to scar over and it will no longer be sensitive to the touch the way it was. It's not going to trigger you anymore, but it's a scar that tells a story. And up until recently, I've thought, wow, that it's kind of one and done. Like there it is. Like once it heals and it scars over, then it's good. You're able to, you have a testimony, and we have the cute adages. It's like your test becomes a testimony, all these kinds of things. Right. But even physiologically, what happens with scar tissue is it can still create blockages in lymph flow.
Yeah.
Where it causes you to not be able to detoxify in your body. Well, I think the same thing is true in our soul, that you still have to go. And sometimes people have to do like scar tissue massages to kind of stimulate that lymph flow. I think sometimes with our own healing, we've got to do the same thing. There's some of that scar tissue massaging that has to happen to re-engage the flow of the detoxification of some of these mindsets and some of these triggers and some of these,
Wow, that is very insightful. You're absolutely right. I hadn't thought of it in that way because similar to you, like I know all the things we say about scars, but you're right. Yeah. And I think for us writing the book in the last 2 years has definitely been that. And some of that like scar tissue massaging and getting back to the root of, the story and the things that were blocked, that we had kind of not fully dealt with. Like that absolutely is a perfect description of what it's been through, what it's been to walk through like this next part. Wow. That is a powerful example.
Greta, tell us, so when did you guys begin going, okay, this isn't just Aaron and I's story. It's not just impacting us. It's also impacting our kids, or it could impact our kids. And so we now need to begin thinking through how to have the conversation with our kids. 'Cause I have to imagine at first you're like, head down, let's work on us. Let's figure this out. Then as your kids are getting older, as you're seeing the landscape of what's going on around the world, as their friends are getting devices, as just pornography specifically is having more accessibility. When was the hinge point for you guys where you're like, oh, we need to wrestle through how to talk to our kids about this?
Well, for me, it was on my mind almost immediately, even though our kids were all really young. And that was a pain response, right? I was like, oh, I am
like
never
a mama hen protector kind of thing. Yeah, in a lot of ways, I'm sure.
Yeah, I will never let this happen to my kids. And even forward thinking, like I will never let my sons do this to their wives, or I will never let my daughter walk through this. Right. Which I don't have control of. But in the moment, it felt like, well, that is my mission. How can I prevent this from being generational for our family? And so at first it was just like, well, we'll do whatever it takes to prevent that from happening. And so that was part of my healing journey, was learning everything I could about pornography because I had almost zero knowledge. And that really was part of the problem, is that both Aaron and I had very few to no tools for how to deal with pornography use, pornography addiction. I didn't even know that was a thing. And so like learning or how to talk about these kinds of issues, like we had no training, no tools. And I think like, wow, our story could have been different if we would have had those things when we were younger, maybe.
Yeah.
And so that became like a driving passion for me, was like, well, how can we do better for our kids than we did for us, right?
Yeah,
what could we do differently? What could we do better? And a big part of that was then, how do we open communication as a family, talk about not just the dangers of pornography, but how do we create a healthy sexual culture in our home where we're not afraid or embarrassed to talk about our sexuality, what God has designed, all of that stuff. And so we worked as a couple, as a family, creating that. But then, like you said, our kids are getting older, and now I'm recognizing, okay, well, I can't like build a wall high enough around our house and our kids to keep everything out. Like, instead, I was like, well, can I engage with other moms and we can have this conversation and talk about how we, as moms of our kids who are playing together and growing up together, that we could all keep our kids safe.
Wow.
And so that was kind of the catalyst of, how am I going to talk to other moms first? And what I found was that became, again, a huge part of my healing journey. At that point, Aaron was like, I'm not ready for us to talk about our story. But he's like, I think you could be a tremendous help to other moms if you just take it from the standpoint of, how can we as parents help our kids? And not really share the depth of where this came from, but just be like, hey, I want to protect my kids. They're growing up in a digital world. What can we do? And that became the place where we started. I had a podcast at the time. I shared one episode where I talked about how we could protect our kids from pornography. The other girls that I did the podcast with, they were terrified to talk about it. They're like, you can talk about it, but we're not saying anything. We don't know how. And that was where I began, and it grew from there. And again, God used that to bring healing and really change our story.
Wow. I love that you have extended the conversation to a broader sexual integrity. You know, there's this idea, it's not just like hey, don't do that. It's got to encompass something that is a lot more about God's desire for us, and the beautiful boundaries that he has created for us when it comes to our sex life. And I love that that's really the message that you're really, it's kind of undergirding this message of, it's time to talk to your kids about porn. What did you guys, as you're wrestling through this with these moms, what are some of the, I don't know if it would be like cornerstones or pillars or some things that you were like, hey, this governs our conversation around this. These are some of the things that these are some principles that we really found to be pretty universal, no matter what family situation you may be in when it comes to talking to your kids about this.
So I think that it was clear from the beginning that one of the things we needed to do was to take shame out of the equation as best as possible. And not just shame of, oh, I, had some sort of sexual misstep. But even shame around sex in general, like in like the goodness of sex, because both Aaron and I growing up in Christian homes where sex was hardly talked about, it wasn't like our parents were purposely making us feel embarrassed or ashamed about the concept or idea of sex. But by not talking about it at all, or hardly at all, it attached this kind of inadvertent shame, like this idea of like, we're kind of embarrassed to talk about it. And that just kind of made us embarrassed and made us feel like, oh, well, we don't really know how to talk about it either. And so, if we create this culture in our home of, like I said earlier, a healthy sexual culture where we're not embarrassed to say every part of your body is made and designed by God. You are made in his image. Every part of you has been created for a purpose. Yeah. And there are no bad parts on your body. Every part of you is purposeful and wonderful. we celebrate it, we honor it, you're worthy of respect. Every part of your body is worthy of respect. So much so that we need to learn what it means to honor and respect not just our own bodies, but other people's bodies. And as they grow up, that then enters the conversation of, oh, this is why pornography is not good, because it doesn't honor and respect God's design for sexuality, but also even for bodies. Like, pornography does not honor the human body, right? It exploits, it abuses, it uses, it's selfish. And so when we create this foundation of saying God's plan is that we are made in his image, every part of us is good, designed for a purpose, but there are boundaries. Like you said, I love that you use that language. There are boundaries so that we can we can experience sex and sexuality in his best way.
Right.
Then I think that creates a safe and shame-free foundation to then have conversations as our kids get older to touch on those things that feel really scary and difficult to talk about. But I have experienced it to be less difficult and less scary with my kids as they grow up, having those conversations, because we had that foundation of safety, comfort, and no shame.
Yeah, it's so good. We are trying to be preemptive with some of these conversations around sexuality and sex with our kids. And we started with our daughter 2 years ago. And prior to this, Christy, my wife, she was borrowing a metaphor from The Hiding Place. So the Corrie ten Boom book, where when Corrie ten Boom was young and she asked about a question that was too big for her to really understand, her grandfather said, "Hey, can you pick up that suitcase? And until you can carry that suitcase over your head, I can't answer that question for you. It's too heavy for you," right? Trying to help her understand. So Christy kind of borrowed that. She told our kids when they were young, "Hey, can you pick up my bike? Until you can pick up my bike." This is a bike over the head kind of conversation. It's too heavy for you to carry. So then she plans an evening to share with Natalia about sex and kind of have the talk, right?
Yeah.
And as Natalia, she described it to me later as she's sharing this with Natalia, Natalia's eyes are getting so big and she goes, "Mom, no, this is a bike over the head conversation. This is not something that we're."
Yes. I have had that. One of my kids responded in a similar way. I get that.
But the point is that these moments in these conversations, as you said earlier, it can feel very unnerving and difficult. And I mean, it's just like, how do I even begin to have this conversation? And, I'm sure that you're probably of the same mindset that you're probably, if you're waiting till they kind of you've waited too late. We got to get out ahead of this because they're already early on getting influenced by their peers. Can you talk about that when it comes to maybe like, what are some cues we can take on timing? What does that look like when we start to have these conversations? Because you said immediately, Mama Bear kind of fear response was like, but you probably step back, I'm sure, and you were a little more mindful and go, okay, well, when is the right time? How do we do this? So what does that look like? How do you advise us through that?
Well, I will say in the course of almost 16 years now, it has changed as far as when to have the conversation, because from my oldest is 21 now, and like in the span of 15 years, the access kids have to the internet and how early they're using the internet or other people around them has changed dramatically. Yeah. And so, in the past, I would have said, oh, when your child's 10, 11 years old, 12, like starting puberty, that's when you can begin having conversations specifically about how to stay safe from pornography or explicit images. But now I actually say it needs to be younger, because the average age of first time exposure is between the ages of 8 and 11.
True.
And that's very young, but it makes sense because kids are on screens from such a young age for school, for entertainment, to keep them busy while we're, shopping at Costco, or they're around other kids who are on screens. So we might be like, well, yeah, my 8-year-old's not on a screen. They're not seeing that stuff. But are they on a sports team? Are they riding the bus? Are they going to church and they're, sitting in Sunday school looking at somebody else's phone because the kid is 8 and they have a phone because, their parents are like, this is fine. This is what we do. This is how the world works now. So, it's changed in terms of when we need to talk to our kids. And so I believe that by the time your kid is 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, they should have a knowledge of what pornography is and how to respond to it.
Wow.
Because they need to have a plan. Because really, if you imagine that first time exposure happening to a kid who's never been told how to respond to explicit images or movies, seeing something so incredibly shocking could leave them feeling ashamed, afraid, feeling curious about what they've seen. They could have a physiological response that they have no idea what to do with. They have no category for all of those thoughts, those feelings, those emotions. But if you have prepared them for that moment and you've said something like, sweetheart, I need to tell you about this thing called pornography. It's pictures or movies of people who have no clothes on, because sometimes people make this really foolish decision to be on, to have pictures or movies of their bodies online and on screens showing their whole bodies. And I want you to know what to do if that happens to you. And then you give them 3 quick things. If you see it, turn your computer, close the computer, or turn the phone over, walk away from that screen, and then come find me or dad or a safe grown-up, tell them what happened. And you have diffused some of that shock, some of the feelings of shame that might happen, or even the curiosity to keep it hidden and then go back and look for more, because you've named it and you've told them this isn't safe for you. Our kids are so used to us giving them talks about how to stay safe in all kinds of ways, how to safely cross the street, how to, not touch the stove because it's hot, how to, if they're using a knife in the kitchen, how to do that safely. So if you frame it in, this is a safety talk, this is a digital safety talk, it takes away some of the power pornography could have if we don't say anything at all. And so that's why I recommend having a conversation when they're younger, even though as parents we're horrified at the thought. But what we really need to understand is, yes, this is not the ideal, but we don't live in an ideal world. We live in a world where little kids are exposed to pornography, and that can have a devastating effect if we don't preemptively act and give them the tools that they need to respond quickly and safely.
Yeah. Yeah. There is a mark, a target, and a ploy of the enemy to try to get us to not talk about this, to get us to stay silent. He wants to steal, kill, and destroy, and he wants to keep the things that need to be exposed to the light hidden. And those just grow as they get, as they remain hidden and they don't get exposed to the light. And so it becomes, it quickly deviates or devolves into something that is much bigger than what it could have been and what it should have been. Even if you're watching this, listening to this right now, I'm sure at some point we edited this out, but Greta was having a little bit of a coughing fit. And I think honestly, it was I find this, Greta, when I go and preach and I'm preaching on a particular topic that you can tell the enemy does not want this to be exposed to the light. And I'll have the same thing happen. And it's almost like there's this spiritual attack, especially right now in this, because if the enemy can grab hold of young kids and put them in bondage at an early age, think about how difficult that is to unshackle themselves from that, to untake, and they cannot and will not step into the fullness of what God has for them.
Yes, exactly. And that is why I want to talk about it with parents who have even little kids, because God has given me a vision of freedom for generational change and instead of generational bondage. Because imagine a kid that's exposed to pornography at a young age, like you said, like to free themselves of those shackles is hard work. And it doesn't just impact them in that moment. It can impact them in their adult life, in their marriages, and then their kids and their grandkids. Yeah. But it doesn't have to be that way. God can give freedom from that generational curse. But it really starts with us being willing to have uncomfortable conversations and to say, we're not afraid of this. God is bigger than pornography. God is bigger than sexual sin. He can handle it. He can hold it and he can heal us and he can give us freedom. But we have to be willing to be maybe embarrassed or uncomfortable and have conversations with our kids, with other parents, with each other on a podcast. I can say it's okay. Right. We're not ashamed. We're not embarrassed. We're not afraid. God is bigger.
Right. I don't, of course, I'm not the guy who's like, oh my gosh, technology and screens are bad and, all this kind of stuff, right? It's just like any innovation. I mean, we're talking on a screen right now. We're leveraging the power of technology to build God's kingdom. And so any innovation, any technology is inherently amoral, and it's what do you use it for? But at the same time, this has caused our family, just like the rapid exposure and how quickly our kids could not only have access to pornography, but also what it can do to their brains. As you read things like from Jonathan Haidt and the anxious generation, just different things like that, the dopamine hits that they're receiving, the comparison that like just in general, has this also caused you guys to really, and maybe with your mom group and as you guys to really think through, okay, what are we exposing our kids to, not just in pornography, but just like in general and the concerns and worries of this world and screen time and all of that? How have you guys navigated that?
Yeah, I have really strong feelings, for example, about social media and having kids, like the average age to get social media is like middle school for kids. And I am like, there is no worse time to give your kids social media than middle school. That's such a hard time of life. And now you're like throwing them into this giant pool of people who are going to make them feel, dissatisfied with themselves and their relationships and feel left out and watch things that, are maybe actually harmful for them, or at the very least, like a giant waste of their time. So for example, we've said in our family, we're going to wait to do social media. So social media is a 17 or 18 or not at all kind of thing. And we have 40, one kid we have one kid he's not on social media, has zero interest, just doesn't want to be. Yeah. And another our oldest is an artist and he needs social media for his art. Like that's part of the way he gets clients and, gets art jobs. And I understand that because social media is part of my work as an author, a speaker, podcaster, but how can he use it well? So when it was time for him to say, okay, I want to have a social media account, here's the one I'm going to use. I'm not going to use these others because they will be a giant waste of my time and they're not really a place for me to find work. Here's how I'm going to use it. Here's how I'm going to use it well. There's accountability. Like every kid in our family has access to they could look on my phone. They have access to my password. I'm not hiding anything from them. So those are some of the ways that we have tried to navigate, a feeling of just openness and wisdom and discernment using technology. And our kind of method has always been like the least amount rather possible when they're younger. And then they have access to more and more as they get older, but it's training. So when they were little, it was like, you can't do a Google search for something on your own. You tell me, Mom, I want to look this up. I remember my kids were little. They're like, can you type down blah, blah, blah. I want you to look it up. Yeah. And that's fine. Like they need that guidance. It's discipling, learning how to use, technology safely and wisely. But then as they get older, giving them more freedom. So then you reach the point where you can say, hey, I want to look this up. And like, okay, get my computer. You can, do it in the kitchen while I'm here making dinner.
Right.
To eventually the point where, yeah, you're looking that up on your own because you're an adult and you need to learn how to do this.
Yeah.
But hopefully the training that we've done and the tools we've given them will help them make wise choices as adults using the internet safely and wisely. It's a process, and it's just something that we need to consider. This is another way we train our kids for becoming an adult, just like we teach them, to eventually learn how to brush their own teeth and cut their own fingernails. Right. We also have to teach them how to use technology wisely and safely.
Wow. Greta, thank you. So this has been awesome. This has just been I feel like we could sit there and talk about this for hours. And I know that you guys who are watching this and listening to this, if you have kids, especially, you have a lot of questions around this. It doesn't matter how much you feel like you've navigated these waters. There's a lot of questions surrounding this because every child is different. Every family unit is different. I want to highly recommend It's Time to Talk to Your Kids About Porn, A Parent's Guide to Helping Children and Teens Develop Sexual Integrity. We'll put the links right here on the show notes below the YouTube video where you can connect more with Greta, where you can get this book really easily. We've barely scratched the surface on it. So you're going to need to do a deep dive on this. But Greta, thank you. Where can we follow along more of what you're doing and what you're putting out?
Well, you can find me on my website, which is gretaeskridge.com. I'm on Instagram, Greta Eskridge. That's the only social media I'm on, and it's where I'm the most active. So you could follow along there. And then you can find my book wherever books are sold.
Yeah. And I will say this, if you are a homeschooling family, there's a whole lot of stuff that we did not talk about.
Yes.
And Greta has a lot of stuff on that. So you definitely want to tune in there. I know that as we're wrestling through that decision right now, and as we're consulting folks, I've been picking Greta's brain a little bit and going, hey, what should we think through? How should we do this? And she's been so helpful for that. So make sure you tune into what's going on there. Greta, thanks so much. This has been an honor to talk to you.
Thank you for having me. It was a great conversation. I really appreciate you being willing to dive into difficult topics. It's so important. We're leading the way for parents to see, look, we're smiling at the end.
That's right.
It's okay. We can do it. We can do it.
Yeah, it's hard and good. And those two things can be held in tension. And so that's the beauty of what God does in the midst of our stories is it's hard and it is good as we keep following after him and walk in the pathway he's put in front of us. So thank you, Greta. This is just such a delight to be able to spend time with you. Thanks for joining us for today's episode of the Nothing is Wasted podcast. We hope you enjoyed our conversation and found it as encouraging and insightful as we did. Now, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen, and leave us a rating and review. Your feedback helps us to connect to those who need these stories of hope and healing most, and to reach more listeners just like you. Also, subscribe to our Nothing is Wasted Ministries YouTube channel. Now be sure to stay connected with us on social media. You can follow us at Nothing is Wasted Ministries. Follow me at Davey Blackburn. We'd love to interact with you, so be sure to stop by and let us know how these conversations are impacting you and your story. And if you want to learn more about all the incredible resources we have available to help you navigate whatever valley you're walking through, visit our website at nothingiswasted.com. If you're ready to get started in your journey towards healing and finding purpose in your pain, we'd love to help. Simply go to nothingiswasted.com/start here for your next step. We want to thank our guests, and we want to thank you, our Nothing is Wasted community, for tuning in regularly. Remember, no matter what challenges you face, whatever pain you are walking through, nothing is wasted. We'll see you next time for another incredible conversation here on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. But before you go, check out this short clip from our next episode. Thanks for joining us, friends.
And I think sometimes being on a journey actually is what builds our faith more than that instantaneous healing. It's like the long path that actually drives us into a deeper faith. And we see, little answers to prayer, almost like these Easter eggs on the journey of like,
Wow.
oh, I prayed for that specifically and I saw it. And like, I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt, like, he's real. He's really, really real. And I've seen him in my life. And I couldn't say that in the same way before chronic pain. I believed it, but it's been deepened. My faith has.